Hey, it's Adam with Vetere Custom Woodworks. Today, I'm building a one-of-a-kind jewelry box. This client asked for a custom leather insert for something that even took me by surprise when he told me what it was for. If you're just as curious as I was, stick around and watch this one come together. Lots to do, so let's get to it. What kind of woodworker am I? Gotta cut these things off. Idiot. This project started off like many other projects. I received a message asking if I could make a jewelry box, similar to one I had made my wife a couple years ago, but a little smaller. About 6 by 6 by 2 inches. That's something by something by something for those non-freedom unit people out there. Just kidding. I'll throw the metric on the screen for you. Huh. You know, has anyone ever wondered why Freedom Unit's real name is the Imperial System? Didn't the Imperial Army oppress the Jedis for over 30 years? Maybe George Lucas really meant to tell the world that the Imperial Unit System is evil. Take that, conspiracy theorists. Anyways, where was I? Oh right, the project. So, I asked the client, so you need a necklace jewelry box? He said no, it's for a spacebar. But not any old spacebar. This is an 18-karat gold-plated keyboard spacebar. 2 of them, to be exact. I'd never heard of something quite like this before, but it was certainly unique, and I was eager to take this project on. It certainly turned out to be one of my most interesting jewelry boxes I've made to date. Except for my wife's, of course. Hers is still the best. Love you. It's important to recognize the right time to buy prepared lumber instead of rough-cut lumber. There wasn't much lumber needed for this project, so I spent a few extra bucks on S3S boards from the local supplier. I saved about an hour of milling time, which allowed me to immediately move into measuring and ripping my boards into the 2 pieces I needed for the box walls. That hour saved is worth the few extra bucks in my book. I'm aiming for 3/4 of an inch thick here, which I snuck up on using my drum sander, and now I can get to work on the continuous grain mitered corners. I don't want the thickness of the pencil lead to impact my blade placement and then affect the look of the continuous grain around the box. So I pulled out the marking knife in order to get nice, crisp lines for reference at the miter saw. An additional benefit here is by pressing firm enough, I'm cutting through those first few layers of wood fibers. This will help prevent any splintering during the cut. I know it's heard often here on YouTube, but it's these little attention to detail items that really make products stand out. The little extra time I take now will have a huge impact down the road. Now if I can just figure out how I labeled these, there we go. I can show you what I mean by continuous grain. You can see my numbers marked on the top of each corner match up. Then on the face grain, it looks like it's flowing around the corner. It's a small box, so it may not be noticeable, but like I said, it's the details that count. I do a quick test fit with the insert that will hold the 2 space bars. We'll get to how I made that in a sec. I'm confident at this point from my fumbling around that this will all go together, so I move on to the CNC, well I guess backwards, to making that insert I just mentioned. So this is a part of the project where I'm stepping into some new territory. Not the CNC part, but for what I'm going to be using the insert that I make on the CNC for. The client requested a leather interior for the box. When he asked, I had a rough idea of how I would do this, but needed to do a little more research on leatherwork. I have a friend that recently got into leatherwork, and so we talked for a little bit, and he recommended wet pressing the leather since there were lots of small but flat areas the leather needed to line. I had contemplated cutting and gluing in small individual pieces onto each surface of the interior, but luckily my wits came about me and was talked into another method. The client was nice enough to send me a 3D model of the spacebar, so I 3D printed it and used it to test tolerances as I progressed through the project. It's just barely fitting and I need to account for the thickness of the leather, so I take some measurements and head back to my file to make some quick adjustments and try again. I thought I had accounted for the extra length and width I needed when creating the initial design, but sometimes measurements and reality just don't match up. I'm gonna say that this was definitely the fault of the evil Imperial units. Spock definitely used the Force to alter these numbers. Or was it Vader? I don't know. I get these cartoons messed up all the time. Well, I just did something stupid. So that audio didn't turn out too great, so you get me instead. What I ended up doing was cutting the pocket a little bit too small. I used the 3D print to check the size, took a few measurements, and adjusted the tool path to make the pocket just a little bit wider. Ultimately, I didn't secure the MDF back down to the machine bed, so when I ran the program, it shifted the piece and ruined the pocket that I needed. So ultimately, I had to do it again, and you see me reprogramming it in the next few shots. You win some, you lose some. Sometimes you make mistakes, but you just gotta keep moving forward. So, on to doing it again. Luckily, I had enough MDF lying around the shop to be able to quickly make those adjustments to the toolpaths, then reset the CNC to 0, and like any fine craftsman, work on my finger strength and press go. Time to sit back, relax, crack open a cold brewski, and let the machine do the work. Now I know what you purists are thinking. This isn't real woodworking. Maybe, maybe not. But it's a tool in my arsenal that expands the capabilities of my woodshop to be able to make great products for clients. Let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with my thoughts. I'm thinking one day I might connect this bad boy to AI and see what this machine is really capable of. Maybe it'll make a metric army to rise up against the evil Imperial units. The world may never know. Here you can see the first look at how the male and the female molds will sandwich together to form the leather insert. I took a few more measurements and determined I needed just a little bit more clearance for the spacebar, so I decided to square up the corners to get that little extra room I needed. Since this is all new to me, I'm still not quite sure how this will turn out, but I'm fairly confident that with enough force over area, the leather will fold, unlike me. This is where the wet portion of the wet pressing comes into play. When you soak leather, it becomes much more pliable, so I soaked the piece in lukewarm water for about 20 minutes, then dried off the excess to prevent any excessive amounts of water soaking into the MDF and causing it to swell. I did do a proof of concept, which you can see in the background, just to make sure I wasn't going completely off the deep end with this method I was attempting. Now I've been talking long enough, so I'll let you enjoy this portion of the video as I summon my inner Newtons in order to squeeze the living Pascals out of this mold. I'm checking around the edges to ensure there are no gaps between any portion of the leather and MDF. Parallel clamps came in real handy for this application since these provided a perfectly flat and, well, parallel face to apply even pressure. I'm not seeing any gaps, so I'll set a timer for 20 minutes and wait to see how this turned out. Time's up, so, well, wait, you didn't see that. I definitely didn't set a timer just for the video. Anyways, this gets unclamped and we finally get to see how our little experiment turned out.
Ooh, baby.
I think past Adam is happy with the results, at least for now.
Oh, come on, fit. What did I do wrong this time?
The evil Imperial units strike again. If you couldn't guess already, it's still not fitting. And truly, I'm not too certain where I went wrong this time. You win some, you lose some, but I'm really starting to second guess my method for making this insert. A few curse words and self-degrading imposter syndrome insults later, I again broke out the chisel to make the mold again slightly larger. Despite my curse words, this was a blessing in disguise. Even though all these iterations are taking me some extra time, it is better to sneak up on that perfect fit rather than try and nail it the first time.
Well, after all of that...
Hey, it's Chop Adam again because clearly I can't set up a microphone to save my life sometimes. To paraphrase what I'm saying here, I'm essentially taking two pieces of MDF that I cut to the exact size of the spacebar. I'm going to press these down into the mold so I can try and widen the space again to try and get that perfect fit. I probably should have come up with this idea a little bit sooner, but sometimes a little bit of trial and error doesn't hurt. That's it in a nutshell. Fingers crossed that this method works this time so we can get back to the rest of the build. I'll clamp these in and let it sit for another 20 minutes. Needless to say, this method was way more successful than the full mold. However, if I were to use this method alone, I would not have gotten the flat top molded properly, so I think in the future, the answer is definitely a combination of these two methods. Or better yet, I'll just become a Jedi and support the rebels. Yeah, that sounds way cool. Back at the CNC, we're making the lid. This CNC method is the same that I used for the previous jewelry box I'd made for my wife, so I figured to repeat the same steps. This lid will have a 3/4 inch border of wenge, followed by a 1/4 inch accent of inlaid solid brass bar. This will be a nice contrasting ring and provide some separation between the dark walnut and the even darker wenge. Before I get to cutting the pockets for the brass and the wenge inlays, I engraved the client's name into the center of the lid. This will eventually be filled with a baby blue colored epoxy, then sanded smooth. The engraving turned out well, so on to cutting the recesses for the border pieces. I set my pocket toolpath to be just slightly shallower than the intended thickness of the brass and the wenge strips that I'll get to milling up next. Since I've realized I can't always trust my inputs into the machine, I'm double checking measurements before removing the lid from the machine bed. 0.09 inches was the goal here, and it looks like we're averaging around 0.088, so I'd say I'm good with it. Let's pop this off of here, trim off the waste, and get to cutting the brass accent pieces. Starting to add the brass is definitely a turning point in this project. We go from a regular walnut box to something that I think will really stand out. The brass really pops on this lid and adds a nice elegance I don't think would be achievable if I'd only accented it with just wenge or maybe replacing the brass with a lighter colored wood species like maple. I really dig this combo, and I will certainly be using it in future builds. Moving on to the wenge. Wenge is hard for me to get in my area. I had these boards from a time I went up to a lumber supplier near LA. And no, not the famous GL veneer as showcased on many other YouTube woodworking channels. Sidebar, I did have a chance to go there once, and wow, what an operation. Anywho, these are some of the same boards I used for my wife's jewelry box, so this was all I had left. Unless I wanted to make a 5-hour round-trip drive to get a few more small pieces of wood, well, I needed to be extra careful not to cut any of these pieces too short. Needless to say, stress levels were high, well, as high as they can be when you're only woodworking. Maybe I should cut one of these too short. I can always use an excuse to go to an exotic wood lumber yard. Honey? What are we doing next weekend?
We're not going to the lumber yard.
Dang, thought that would work. Oh well, maybe next time. As you can see, it's a tedious task lining up all these corners and making sure there's no gaps. But now that it's done, on to filling the engraving with epoxy. As I'm mixing this up, I realized that I forgot to mask off the sides, so I quickly stopped mixing and get to doing that. Had I not caught this and the epoxy flowed in between the walnut and the brass, it likely would have been almost impossible to get out. Luckily, crisis averted. I made a test piece with 6 engravings on it, each filled with a different shade of blue. I sent the photos to the client and they chose the one that precisely measured out to 3 squeezes of royal blue pigment, 5 squeezes of bright white pigment, 2 dashes of lightning blue powder, and 1 dash of pearl blue powder. Good thing I wasn't around during the invention of the imperial units. Instead of ounces, you'd have dashes and squeezes. I mean, come on. Who decided 16 ounces was going to be 1 pound? Really? I let the epoxy cure overnight, and the next morning I wheeled out my drum sander to get the bulk of the epoxy off. I'll finish it off with the palm sander, ensuring I keep the sander flat so I don't gouge any other parts of the lid. I know, why have a drum sander and not use it for exactly what it's meant for? Honestly, it's a huge pain to change out the paper. I keep 80 grit installed in here because it's what I end up needing most for bulk material removal that I can't send through the planer. It's quicker to switch to the random orbit sander, progressing up the grits for a nice smooth finish, than to progress up the grits on the drum sander. So what it really comes down to is that it's a case-by-case basis for me on how I use this tool each time I wheel it out. I do, however, think it's time for an upgrade on my palm sander. This one was one of the first tools I purchased for myself nearly 10 years ago, and the pad is starting to crumble. It's also slow at material removal compared to higher end models on the market today. Just like trips to the lumberyard, I always need an excuse for a new tool, and since time is money, well, I've already saved up enough. Thanks, Woodworker Logic. Coming to the rescue yet again. I left the wenge overlapping the edge in order to get a perfect seam. In hindsight, I should have flush trimmed the edges after installing the lid on the base. This likely would have alleviated much of my headache I ran into later when aligning the lid with the box while attaching the hinges. I could have installed the hinges, then flush trimmed everything, and it would have lined up perfectly. Lessons learned for next time. Jumping over from the lid, I take a quick moment to get the insert finished up before moving on to gluing up the box. The bottom of the insert will be exposed, and I definitely didn't want the MDF showing, so I used more of the leather to line the bottom. I used contact cement to adhere the leather, and if you're not familiar with contact cement, you coat each face of what you're adhering, then let it dry for about 5 minutes. Once the two surfaces touch, well, good luck getting them unstuck. I should probably be wearing gloves here, so don't take after my example. This leather has been super enjoyable and easy to work with. Well, minus those mistakes I made. But I can't exactly blame the leather for that. Those were pretty much all on me. And, George Lucas. Nonetheless, this has been a great first experience, and I'm looking forward to integrating more leather into my woodwork. Assembling the box is pretty straightforward. These corner clamps are one of the best cheap purchases I've made in a while. Not sponsored, but link in the description if you want to get your own. They're super easy to use and surprisingly strong. The downside is that they do leave a pinhole sized indent on the sides, which are easily fixed with filler or wood glue and sawdust. But mitered box glue-ups have definitely been way less painful since having these. Like anything, they're not a one-size-fits-all solution, but for small box glue-ups, they work great. And while your awesome self is down there checking out the link, maybe consider hitting that subscribe button or giving this video a like if you're enjoying what you're seeing so far. It really helps the channel grow so we can keep making videos for you to enjoy. Thanks in advance, it really does mean a lot to us. Back at the glue up station, I make sure I clean up all my glue squeeze out since I didn't tape my corners. Then I move on to checking for square. These little machinist squares come in handy for this. A tiny bit of adjusting was needed, and now it's all set, so now it's just a waiting game for it to dry. The next day, and it's all dry, and off camera I decided to glue on some more of the border pieces of wenge. I figured since I showed you that process already, no need to repeat it, so on to installing the hinges. You'll notice double-sided tape is my best friend during this step. I use it a lot. First, I'm using it here to stick the box and the lid together so I can flush trim the lid to size. Looking back at my process again, I think I would wait until later to do this step. Everything still came out flush in the end, but I can see where this could have gone wrong. This is especially so since aligning hinges has always been a weak spot of mine in my woodworking abilities. So again, lesson learned for next time. On to the close-ups. I cannot stress enough how critical it is to take your time here. I'm installing the Brusso HD 638 quadrant hinges. Expensive, but really great quality, and it's what the client requested. I use my marking gauge to scribe the location of where to align the outer edges of the hinge. Then use more of that double-sided sticky tape to adhere the hinge temporarily to the box. Once it's stuck to the box, I trace it out using my X-Acto knife. Once I peel up that cut portion, it creates a mask that helps me see the area I need to router out. I started off by using this 1/8 inch end mill and freehanding the recess for the hinges using my Dremel. The Dremel was very unstable and I was not happy with the way this recess was going. I made my way through it, but I knew a better method was needed for the remaining recesses. A little bit of cleanup with the chisel and we're on to, yet again, another cameo of double-sided tape. I'm using it here to transfer the hinge location to the lid. This step is where this whole project could seriously go wrong if I don't take my time aligning the edges. The unfortunate part is I wouldn't know if I mess it up until after cutting the recesses, just because that's the process of installing these hinges. There's no play or adjustment screws in these like you see in your everyday kitchen cabinet hinges from the big box store. I know I said it no more than a minute ago, but slow and steady truly wins the race here. I use a similar masking method like I did before by tracing the hinges with my knife, but instead of blue tape, the double-sided tape will do just fine for me this time. I feel for flush between the lid and the box to make sure my alignment is still okay, then separate the two pieces so I can get to cutting. Off camera, I decided to make a clear acrylic router template on my CNC that would allow me to use my larger palm router with a larger 1/4 inch bit, instead of the unstable Dremel with the sort of wobbly 1/8 inch bit. This gave me a whole lot more stability and made my cuts much more accurate. Speaking of stability, somebody needs to pay more attention. See? Told ya. Your sloth-like reflexes won't protect you there when you're texting on the job. Could have ruined the whole project. Even worse, somebody could have died. Okay, well, maybe I'm over-exaggerating a little bit. About time you've taken long enough of a break. Wait, what are you doing now? What? Seriously? Coffee? You almost broke something. No, oh, okay. Now you're just gonna shove it in my face. You know what? That's fine. No paycheck for you. You know, I hope it's the world's crappiest cup of coffee.
No, it's the world's best cup of coffee.
Is your break finally over? Can we get back to work? Okay, here we go. Wow, looks like you're starting a fire in there. Guess it's about time to replace that router bit. Well, I got a little carried away with that pass. A small piece chipped out of the mitered corner. I was somehow able to find it in the giant pile of sawdust at my feet, so I took a quick second to repair it with a few dabs of superglue and some activator. That'll do, so reattaching the router jig and finishing up this cut. Hopefully no more blowouts. All good, so we'll get some more test fitting done.
So much better. Nice.
Shop Adam is very pleased with how well the router template worked. Going to label this one and hang it on the wall for future use. Centering drill bits are a must when installing small hinges. Prusso provides a steel screw to use as a tapping screw to use before putting in the brass screws. Brass is much softer than steel, so by using the steel screw first, there's less of a chance of one of the brass screws getting stripped or sheared. Unfortunately, the centering drill bit was slightly too small, so I was actually starting to strip the steel screw. I re-drilled out the holes with a slightly larger bit, then used my drill to tap out the holes instead of trying to do it by hand again. This worked much better and no stripping occurred. No, not that kind of stripping. Come on, get your mind out of the gutter. These hinges have a brass arm that needs a pocket drilled below the hinge so that they can freely sink into the closing lid. It also needs a small pocket in the lid for the top portion of the hook to sit when open and close. This will make a little more sense in a second. A 1/4 inch Forstner bit does the job perfectly for this instead of trying to hand chisel out the pocket. Time for a test fit, and you can see how the arm hooks in the top and sinks into the bottom. Perfect. Time for the best part of any project. Rubio Monocoat Pure is my go-to finish. I really like the matte finish and the way it makes the colors in darker toned woods pop, as well as the hard wax coating offers great protection. The only downside to Rubio for me is the 7-day cure time. Yes, it's a one coat system, so technically it's quicker and I'm not spending those extra days adding layers like other finishes, but I wish it could cure faster.
Damn it.
Well, shit. This is a first. Doesn't seem like wiggling it's doing too much. That's definitely not going to fit, and I don't have any smaller syringes, so no precision measurements today, and I guess we'll just eyeball it.
That seems about right.
I'll give it a quick stir and struggle immensely to try and put on a nitrile glove, finally. And I'll get to putting the first coat, and I guess only coat, mono coat, mono, one, yeah, onto the lid, and here we finally get a good look at what this is going to look like in the end. Since this is a small area, I'm just using my hand to spread around the Rubio, but if this were something larger like a table, then I would use a plastic screed to push this around the surface. I'll let the Rubio sit on here for a little bit in a nice thick coating to allow the wood to absorb the finish, and then wipe it off. I'll repeat this for the bottom portion of the box, and you'll notice that I have some blue tape on the bottom. This is because I still need to put the insert into the box, and it will be held on with the bottom border of Wenge. If I were to apply the Rubio to that bottom portion, then the wood glue would not adhere properly, and I wouldn't get a strong bond holding in that insert. So I left it taped off. It's a few days later and I'm getting antsy to install this insert. First step is to take off this protective blue tape from putting on the Rubio, then proceeding to practice my Kobe skills in the garage.
Nailed it.
And this is why I wasn't recruited to college to play basketball. I'm sure the Lakers may still take me though. As my brother might say, measuring once and cutting twice sure seems to have paid off here. This is an absolute perfect fit. I am seeing absolutely zero gaps around the edges. A quick test fit with the 3D printed spacebar, and we are sitting pretty to move on to putting the final brass screws in for final assembly. Say final one more time. I dare you. A little bit of paste wax goes a long way in this last step. Remember how I mentioned that these brass screws are pretty soft and tend to shear? Well, the paste wax helps reduce the friction and just makes it that much easier to screw these in. I honestly don't know what I would do if one of these screws happened to shear right now. Son of a... Just kidding. Gotcha, didn't I? But seriously, after making it this far, no precaution was too much. But with the final screw now in, we can finally put a lid on this and check out the final shots. I am incredibly pleased with how well this turned out. Although it is just a box, it was certainly not an easy project. As you could tell, I made plenty of mistakes along the way. Some avoidable, but none that proved too difficult to correct. But let's be honest, who else gets to make a jewelry box for gold-plated space bars? I gotta say, this one was pretty cool and definitely on the once-in-a-lifetime kind of list. If you liked what you saw here and you want to see more, we would love your support. Go check out the rest of our videos from Vetere Custom Woodworks, and if you'd like to know when we release the next one, please hit that subscribe button. Thank you for watching, on to the next build.